Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT patch rundown video. Today we'll be diving into the newest patch 11.3 and all the changes that come with it. As there was a B patch halfway through 11.2 and the set 4.5 meta changes are still settling, this patch is relatively small. They are targeting a few underperforming champions along with a few tweaks to various synergies, including a minor rework to Divine. With all that said, let's go ahead and dive on in. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video, and since there's no system changes, we can get right into the meat of the patch with trait changes. To start off, we have an interesting functionality being added to Dragon Soul. When the blessing is passed after the unit dies, the next ally to receive the buff will immediately trigger the Dragon Breath with their next auto attack. For a quick refresher, the Dragon Breath will do 50% of the target's maximum health in magic damage. Dragon Soul likely needs a bit more than this to make it a better overall synergy, but it is a nice quality of life change for it. Having the Dragon Breath effect trigger right away instead of having to wait for that champion to attack 5 times will increase the overall damage output when running Dragon Soul. It's good, though probably not enough to really push this synergy to the forefront of the meta. Next, we see a small nerf to Spirit as the trait is performing a bit too well. Way back at the start of set 4, Spirit had an issue of bringing too much value to multiple compositions, most notably being Zed. Fast forward to set 4.5 with the rework to Spirit, and guess what? It's still good with Zed. Of course, it is a valuable trait for other builds, but Zed is one of the best. As for the nerf itself, well, it's pretty small. The attack speed for Force Spirit is going down to 35% from 40%. A 5% nerf isn't too substantial, so don't overreact and say Spirit is a dead synergy because of it. But it will mean that 2 Spirit is more valuable since fitting 2 Spirit into a composition is much easier than 4, and the increase in attack speed really isn't as much as it was previously. Hopefully they don't go too hard on Spirit in future patches, as it's nice to see it being relevant in the meta after spending so long being relatively useless. Up next, we have changes to Slayer. First off, let's just make it clear that while 6 Slayer isn't that popular, 3 Slayer is a common trait in the meta. There's builds utilizing Olaf, Zed, Samira, and even Tryndamere that lean into 3 Slayer. But the issue that they're addressing in 11.3 is that 6 Slayer is a bit underwhelming. Thus, the value for 3 Slayers will be unchanged with the focus being on 6. The lifesteal for 6 Slayers is going up to 30 through 60% from 25 through 50%. Keep in mind that the amount of lifesteal is based around the champion's missing health, so you can consider it an increase of 5% at the high health and 10% at lower health. On the other hand, the increased damage is based on the target's health, so they're going to be a bit lighter on the buffs there. The damage is going from 30 through 75% to 35 through 80%. Overall, it's likely we'll see far less 6 Slayer compositions compared to boards playing just around the 3. It's easier to fit in 3, especially with a chosen champion, so you're able to fit in a lot more champions and traits to bolster the Slayer units. Committing to 6 should be a worthwhile investment, and at the moment, 6 Slayer doesn't provide enough, even with the buffs. With all that said, it may be worth considering exploring a 6 Slayer build, particularly if you can scale into the late game and find Samira. Maybe this will even help Tryndamere out in being a more consistent carry, as he's currently struggling, at least compared to other carries in the meta. And we've saved the biggest trait change for last, as Divine is getting altered once again. It seems like Divine is unable to go more than just a few patches without some sort of sweeping change being introduced, and it's for good reason. The synergy struggles a lot to be useful outside of specific situations because it requires higher tiers of the trait to be useful. For the original set 4, it was usually just Warwick that Divine was relevant in, and now in 4.5, it's usually just Kayle. Of course, you may end up with Divine champions in the trait in other compositions, but that's mainly because the champions are useful. Jax and Lee Sin, for example, are used in Duelist, while Aurelia always has a potential place thanks to Adept. But none of those champions can carry, which is why, for the most part, you'd only bother committing to Divine if you're using Warwick as a carry, or now, Kayle. Alright, back to the changes. First, they're scrapping the buff duration being increased at higher tiers and instead leaving it at a flat 6 seconds. This is a big buff to 2 Divine, but it does make 6 and 8 worse, but seeing as it's rare to go for either of those, this is an overall good change. Next is the damage reduction is receiving a buff as it's going from a flat 45% to 35, 45, 55, and 65%. Of course, buff is relative as it's weaker at the lower end, but scales a lot better later on. Lastly, there's the true damage change, as it's going from a flat 45% to also be 35, 45, 55, 65%. The clear goal here is to try and keep the current status quo of 4 Divine the same, while shifting the power of 2 Divine slightly and increasing the value of 6 and 8 Divine. Just from the numbers alone, it's probably not enough to make Divine any better or worse than it was previously. Sure, committing to 6 is more damage reduction in the true damage, but you're also losing out on 3 or more seconds of the duration. That's a big trade-off considering you want Kale to do as much damage as possible with the true damage bonus, so reducing that at higher tiers may hurt her more than it will help her, even with the buff to the true damage. On the other hand, where it doesn't necessarily help Kale, it does buff Nasa slightly, since reducing the damage taken is good for him. And since we're in a reroll meta where he's already being used, he may actually shoot up in value. All in all, these Divine changes won't likely change how Divine is used, as committing to 6 or 8 usually is not worth it outside of niche situations. Alright, let's move into the next section, champion changes. There's many for 11.3, as the bulk of the balancing that needed to be done happened with the B patch for 11.2. Overall, they seem to be targeting underperforming champions with these balance changes, beginning with Brand. Brand is getting a nice quality of life change to his range, as it's being bumped up to 890 from 660. Honestly, for most ranged champions, the default range should be 890, as it helps a lot with targeting and pathing. Brand wasn't exactly held back by his range, but it's undeniable that increasing it is going to be a good thing. Not a huge change, but smaller tweaks are definitely preferable over drastic ones, as they could end up disrupting the meta heavily. Elise is next, and while she's had some moments in the spotlight, she has overall been one of the weaker champions in the game. Her current problems stem from not providing enough value when transformed, as her traits are far more impactful to your board than she is as a spider. To address that, they've added a Mana Reaver effect to her spider form. Now her attacks in spider form will increase the cost of her target's next spell by 35, 35, and 60%. Seeing as this is a pretty big utility buff for her, they are compensating for it by lowering her health that she gains from transforming to 25, 35, 45 from 35, 40, 45%. It does feel like one step forward, 2 steps back for Elise, as her primary role so far has been as a frontline damage soaker. With less health in spider form, she's not going to be as good in that role anymore, so hopefully the mana increasing effect is enough to offset those nerfs. Really though, this isn't likely to affect her viability in the meta, as that's more dependent upon Cultist than it is on Elise. Tristana has had a few moments in the sun, as there has been reroll compositions that used her as the main carry. But with Sharpshooters and Dragon Soul not performing that well in the meta, it has been rare to see Tristana be that useful at all. Basically, she's a 2-star and forget it kind of champion during stage 2 that you're going to sell off as soon as you can. So naturally, they buffed her. The attack speed of her ability is going up to 60, 70, 90% from 50, 60, 80%. It's a decent buff, especially if you consider scaling with an item like Rageblade. Since rerolling is still popular in the meta, it's likely we'll see a bit more Tristana 3s popping up in games, though her main issue does tend to be damage, so attacking slightly faster might not be enough. The last one cost getting a change is Diana. And really, there isn't much of a balance change coming, as it is a quality of life change. Basically, when Diana would increase in size from something like Titan's Resolve, her orbs would often not hit nearby enemies. To fix this, they've made it so that her orbs will spawn farther away from her during those increases, so the orbs will properly detonate on enemy champions. Again, this is mostly a quality of life fix, but it can be seen as a bit of a buff, as Titan's Resolve is a common item for her. The next and last champion receiving a change in patch 11.3 is Darius. Sadly, Darius has been underperforming, as he doesn't feel nearly as potent as he did during his Space Pirate days of Set 3. Whether this is because his ultimate does less damage when recasted, or his traits just don't quite cut it, we're not sure, but the easiest way that they can fix his issue is a good old-fashioned damage buff.
Tons of damage.
His abilities are going from 550, 800, 1300 to 550, 850, 1400. This really isn't much of an increase, especially since you're rarely ever going to see Darius 3. Hopefully, it will help during Stage 2 and 3, when you may want to run Fortune with Darius, as the increased damage at Tier 2 may swing a fight in your favor for that sweet, sweet Fortune payout. But realistically, these buffs won't make much of a difference for Darius. With champions done, we only have one last section to cover, which is items. Surprisingly, there's only one item being changed in 11.3, and that's Shroud of Stillness. This is a surprise because it seems like item diversity could use a bit of help in making a few items more universal. But that's a much larger issue to tackle than what they seem to want to do for 11.3, so instead, we're left with a minor buff to Shroud. The mana increase is going up to 35% from 33%. This is super minor, and as the patch note states, it's meant to add consistency to the Mana Reaver system. Consistency is nice, but don't expect a 2% increase to make much of a difference. That's all for today, folks. It's good to see they aren't going too hard on balance changes so soon after 4.5 came out. The 11.2b patch had the right amount of tweaks, which allowed them to go lighter in this patch. That said, expect to see larger changes moving forward, as there's definitely some issues with the current gameplay cycle of 4.5. Let us know in the comment section below whether you think Divine will be changed again in the future, or if it's finally hit the sweet spot that they've been aiming for. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.